When you speak to a man in a language he understands, you speak to his head. But when you speak to him in his language, you speak to his heart. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For my grade 11 project, I chose to learn South African Sign Language. A decision that stemmed from my desire to learn more sign language, as I learned baby sign before I could speak. And that sparked a long-lasting curiosity, and learning sign language has taught me much more than I ever expected. To really explain my journey, I would like to take you through the history of sign language, what I discovered in theoretical, and finally into the practical learning that shaped me the most. Sign language has existed long before it was ever formally recognized. Early humans used gestures and facial expressions to communicate, and over time, deaf communities developed their own systems of sign. In the 18th century, a French priest named Charles-Michel de Lippe created one of the first formal systems and the first school for deaf children. Later, in the United States, Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet created the first American school for the deaf, which eventually gave rise to American Sign Language. Here in South Africa, the journey of sign language has been deeply shaped by our country's history of segregation. For a long time, oralism was enforced, where deaf children were forced to lip read instead of signing. But despite this, deaf communities continued to persevere and develop their language. In 2023, South African Sign Language was officially recognized as our country's 12th language. This was a moment not just about identity, but also about equality. However, even though South African Sign Language has been officially recognized, deaf education in South Africa is still very poor, with most children only matriculating around the age of 20. As I explored the theoretical side of this project, I came to understand that sign language is far more complex and expressive than I first thought. It is not just about moving your hands. Facial expressions and body language are a vital role in grammar and meaning. For example, raising your eyebrows can turn a sentence into a question, and shaking your head can negate a sentence. This means that the same hand sign can mean entirely different things depending on whether it is accompanied by a smile, a serious look, or even disgust. Take the two words Afrikaans and dirty. Both have the same hand movement, but the facial expression completely changes the meaning of the word. I also learned that sign languages are not universal. South African Sign Language is completely different from British or American Sign Language, each having its own grammar, vocabulary, and cultural influences. In American Sign Language, the same word for name is the same as the word for bathroom in South African Sign Language. Deaf children who are introduced to sign language early on develop language skills just as hearing children do with spoken words, proving that this is a fully fledged language with its own richness and structure. Unfortunately, children who are exposed later on in life struggle to develop these skills. These children are often born to hearing parents. One of the most important parts of learning sign language is understanding the 5 parameters: hand shape, palm orientation, location, movement, and non-manual features, everything but your hands. This showed me just how precise and expressive the language really is, and how small changes can transform the meaning of a sign. An extension of this is the idea of sign names. Instead of spelling out a person's name, every time, members of the deaf community are often given a unique sign name that reflects something about their personality, appearance, or interests. Sign names are important because they go beyond just practical shortcuts. They show belonging and acceptance within the deaf community. To be given a sign name is a mark of identity, almost like being welcomed into the culture itself. And it highlights how sign language is not just communication, but connection. I have a sign name, and it is theory alone is not enough. To really understand what I went through, I would like to take you through the practical learning that shaped me the most. I started with online classes, repeating the alphabet until my hands remembered the shapes, and I learned common question words like who, what, where, when, and why. I spent hours in front of a mirror trying to get the expressions right, because I quickly realized that my face had to communicate just as much as my hands. One of my favorite exercises was translating a song into sign language, which helped me learn vocabulary in context and gave it an emotional connection that made it easier to remember. Practicing at home made the experience even more meaningful. My father learned sign language alongside me, and it soon became a part of our daily lives. Sometimes I'd sign to him during his meetings, and he would quietly sign back to me. Teaching my mother a few signs turned into something that brought us together as a family and made learning easier, as I knew I was not learning alone. But the most powerful experience came when I signed with members of the deaf community. Speaking to Chris, a deaf friend of my parents, was the first time I realized just how fluent and expressive sign language can be when it is someone's first language. He could speak and lip read a little bit, which made it much easier to communicate. Later, I met Pumlani, a member of the deaf community who could not speak. While I was intimidated, but I was also inspired. He signed so quickly that I struggled to keep up, but I had Megan Greaves, my external mentor, who is a sign language interpreter, to help me when what I had learned was simply not enough. But Pumlani's patience in spelling out words I did not understand made me realize that it matters far more to communicate than it does to get everything perfect. Those conversations were humbling, and they gave me the motivation to keep improving so that one day I could have smoother, more natural conversations. Of course, it wasn't easy, but my dyslexia made it harder to focus on quick movements, expressions, and body language all at once. I sometimes forgot signs as fast as I learned them, and I had to adapt that there are different words for the same words. But through persistence, repetition, and the support from my mentor, Miss Stokes, I grew in confidence. More than that, I grew as a person. I became more patient, more observant, and more determined. I realized that sign language isn't a skill, it's a bridge. Even learning the basics can help someone feel included, respected, and seen. This project began as a way to learn something new, but it became a journey of growth, connection, and responsibility. It opened my eyes to the struggles and pride of the deaf community. It strengthened my relationships at home, and it gave me the confidence to use language not just as a tool for speaking, but as a way to include others. Sign language is more than just hands in motion. It's identity, culture, and belonging. And for me, every sign I've learned has brought the world one step closer to being more inclusive. I would like to sincerely thank my mentors, Ms. Stokes and Megan Greaves, for their continued support and encouragement throughout this project. To Chris and Pumlani, thank you for your patience, and thank you for taking time out of your days to speak with me. I am so grateful to Mrs. Footer, Mr. Bester, and Mr. Hibbert for their steady guidance as guardians during this process. Most importantly, I owe the biggest thanks to my mum and dad for their constant support at home, for investing in this journey with me, and for motivating me whenever I felt I could not continue. Finally, thank you to you all for being such an amazing audience and allowing me to share this project with you. Thank you. And up next, I would like to invite Amaya da Fonseca.
If you do not have big dreams and goals, you'll end up working for someone that does. Good evening, dear parents, teachers, and peers. I am Amaya da Fonseca. 9 months ago, I took on this project with the intention of being a 16-year-old entrepreneur, and I'm glad to present to you tonight as a 17-year-old entrepreneur. Given that, let's embark on this roller coaster of a journey. The grade 11 project is something that has dwelled on my mind since the beginning of my time at Waldorf. The idea always interested me. Then in a blink of an eye, this project became a reality. I contemplated what would push me to reach my potential and benefit my future within the 9 months. With that in mind, Pika Bamboo was born. I decided I wanted to not only create a business, but market one. My mom had leftover stock of bamboo cups and plates from her days of entrepreneurship. The products were very sustainable and eco-friendly. This opportunity was sitting right in front of me, and I grabbed it. To be honest, it took me a while to get the business going. Starting a business seemed so exciting to me, but one of the things I learned early on in this process was that no one sets deadlines for you. You just need to work consistently. And as someone who usually thrives under the adrenaline of last-minute pressure, this was quite a challenge. As I progressed very slowly, I realized I wasn't just entering the world of the market, but stepping into the pages of the past. The concept and idea of trade didn't start with eye-catching logos or fancy websites. It began with bartering, which is a system as old as civilization itself. Thousands of years ago, people in Mesopotamia were exchanging livestock, spices, and tools long before coins or paper money even existed. Even in ancient Greece and Egypt, bartering allowed people to survive, grow, and connect. It is a concept of trade still used today in business to a certain extent. This reminded me that business isn't just about making money, but rather about offering people what they need in exchange for value. In my case, I wasn't creating my own product, but rather giving a forgotten product a new identity. Once I had the name for the business, it was time to create a logo. It needed to represent the product, be eye-catching, and aesthetically pleasing. At this moment, I realized I had already entered the marketing phase, because a logo truly does represent you and the business. I decided to look into other brands, how they told their stories and sold their products to the world, which has been shaped by the marketing industry. Did you know that the first ad dates all the way back to 1472 by a man named William Caxton? And by the 1900s, companies such as Coca-Cola weren't just selling drinks, but were selling a lifestyle. That made me realize that a good product isn't quite enough, but rather how you share it with people and connect your story to your product. Which I later did because I wanted Pika Bamboo to be more than just eco-friendly and sustainable. I wanted it to be a brand that represented the love and warmth of families. Once I decided that, I realized to sell a product, you must understand your target audience, what they lack, what their beliefs are towards the product, and how they feel. This is where I struggled most, since I was only 16 at the time and couldn't relate to parents of young children. This led me to peek into the theory behind marketing and the ways it could help me connect to my target audience better. One of the most powerful and interesting tools I learned was consumer behavior, which is a study of how and why a person makes certain decisions. For instance, why might parent A be perfectly fine with letting their kid use a plastic plate, whereas parent B is adamant on eco-friendly and sustainable products? As I explored this, I began to understand that it's not just about the product, it's about the emotional response it creates. This concept is called utility, which is the satisfaction or happiness that is created when a person uses a product. There are two different approaches to utility. You can try to measure satisfaction with numbers and assume the amount of joy someone gets for something is worth a certain amount of units, which is the cardinal approach. In contrast, there's the ordinal approach, which is a bit more accurate. It doesn't assign numbers, but rather ranks products, for example, by preference. With this new knowledge, I entered Pika Bamboo into the flare market, which is an exhibition for baby products. Not only to display the products, but the new skills I had picked up. Little did I know that not everything is as simple as it is on paper. And this became one of the most challenging aspects of my project. A few days leading up to the event, I encountered a few obstacles with printing shops and card machines. It was truly a spiral of confusion, which taught me, at times, you just need to adjust to the weather. I got back up on my feet, but then it was time to decorate my stall. I walked into the venue feeling lost, uneasy, and small. I thought I was going to tear up on the spot because of stress. Everyone's stalls looked like it had walked straight out of Pinterest. I was very discouraged, to say the least. Luckily, my dad was there. He was quick on his toes and told me not to think about it too much, and we started brainstorming. I agreed, then assembled my dad and gran for the job. We set up, and I must admit, I gained my confidence back after that and was ready. The baby market went on for 3 days. 3 days. Imagine a person who has never worked a 9-to-5 day in their life would feel. Spoiler, not good. I stood there awkwardly for a while, and eventually I began to speak to potential buyers. I must admit that in the moment, my body couldn't tell the difference between speaking to a stranger and being chased by a literal bear. As I spoke to more people, I became more comfortable and thought of different ways to relate to them. On the second day, I made my first sale. I was shocked. I had to say pardon to the lady because I just couldn't believe my ears. I was also a bit distracted because from the corner of my eyes, I could see my dad taking a picture and smiling the same way a kid does when they're told they can have a sweet treat. I was so excited I could test out the card machine and that my speaking skills were proving me wrong. After that sale, I couldn't stop smiling. The feeling was amazing. I felt so accomplished. I may not have left the market with empty shelves, but I left with more knowledge and experience than I could ever imagine. After the market, I was lucky enough to be given the opportunity to job shadow both James Top, who is my external mentor, and Sherry Mayers. I learned different things from both of them. Mr. Top is one of the most zen people I've ever met, and I could truly see how he takes that serenity, not only into his daily life, but his work. He is a business owner. He taught me a lot in the 2 days I spent with him. He enriched my understanding of people, places, and the work environment. The most valuable thing James Top taught me was that you don't have to be loud to be impactful, and for that, I thank him. My experience with Sherry Mayers was wonderful. She is such a ray of sunshine, which I can see she brings into her place of work. She is in the social media field. Sherry's office environment is very modern, and to be honest, I was sold on the popcorn machine. During the time I spent with her, I realized there are different aspects of the marketing industry that I was oblivious to before. When I was with Mrs. Mayers, I felt like I was truly seeing a glimpse into my future. She taught me that there are different sides to everything, and that your work life doesn't have to be lonely. And for that, I thank her. This wasn't just a project to me, but a life lesson, and I thank everyone that was part of it. My guardians for their guidance, my mentor, Mrs. Wolfenden, for believing and dealing with me, my parents, Azizo and Cynthia da Fonseca, for dealing with one too many stressful situations, my grandparents for their enthusiasm towards my project, my brother Caden for making the heavy moments just a little bit lighter, James Top for being my mentor, and Sherry Mayers for their time, my peers and you, my audience. Today, I stand here as not just someone who finished a project, but dared to dream. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chetan Makin, and today I want to share my journey of barbering. Not just the theory and history behind it, but mainly the real practical lessons I learned during my time at Kicks and Whips, under the guidance of my external mentor, Zach. Barbering has a long and fascinating history. If you look back to ancient times, barbers were not only haircutters, but in some cultures, they pulled out teeth, treated wounds, and even performed medical practices like bloodletting. They were trusted members of society because they worked with both skill and responsibility. Over centuries, barbering changed. Today, it is no longer about medicine, but it is still about trust and skill. A barbershop is more than just a place to cut hair. It's a space where people gather, share stories, and leave feeling more confident than when they walked in. The theoretical side of barbering is also important. A barber must understand different hair types, face shapes, tools, and hygiene. Straight hair, curly hair, thick or fine hair, each requires a different approach. Tools like clippers, trimmers, scissors, and razors each play unique roles. Clippers and guards help create fades, scissors give precision, trimmers shape the hairline, and razors provide sharp detail. Hygiene is non-negotiable. Clippers must always be disinfected, scissors should always be wiped, and your hands should always be washed regularly. A dirty tool spreads infection, while a clean workspace shows professionalism. But theory only comes alive when it is put into practice, and that's what my experience at Kicks and Whips gave me. Every Saturday, my day started before 10 a.m. with preparation. Zach always told me, the way your station looks is the way your haircut will turn out. My first task was cleaning, disinfecting clippers, sharpening scissors, laying out combs, and wiping down the chairs. At first, I thought this was just a chore to keep me busy. But over time, I realized it was about safety, discipline, and respect for my clients. I began to notice that when my station was organized, my work flowed more smoothly. When the first client sat down, the real challenge began. Watching Zach cut hair was like watching an artist paint or a musician perform. His hands moved confidently, fading hair smoothly, switching guards at the right time, and talking to the client casually as if it was effortless. When it was my turn, my nerves got the best of me. I remember my first skin fade. My hands shook as I held those clippers. I made a mistake and left a harsh line that looked terrible. My heart dropped, but Zach stayed calm. He showed me how to blend it out, how to adjust the guard, and how to use the corner of the blade to soften out the line. That lesson stayed with me. Mistakes don't define you. Learning from them does. Each client brought something new. Some had thick, stubborn hair that fought against the clippers. Others had thin, straight hair where every small mistake would stand out. Curly hair tested my patience. It needed slower and more careful strokes. Beard trims demanded precision because one slip could change the shape of someone's face. I realized that barbering isn't about one fixed method. It's about adaptability, knowing which technique fits your client in your chair. I also learned some trendy styles, the burst fade, for example. It has the fade curved around the ear, blended into the neckline. It's stylish and sharp, but it's tricky because the curve must be smoothly. I watched Zach carefully, then practiced again and again. The modern mullet is another challenge. It combines a faded front and sides with longer hair at the back. To do it properly, you need balance because the fade must be sharp, but the back must blend naturally without it looking messy. These styles taught me that barbering is as much about creativity as it is about technique. Our lunch breaks were part of the lessons too. Over food, Zach shared his own story times, earlier when he made mistakes earlier in his career, how he built his reputation, and why honesty with clients is important. His words stuck with me. Once someone trusts you with their hair, you can never let them down. It showed me that barbering is not just about skills, but also about character. Afternoons were the busiest. Clients filled the chairs. Conversations flowed about sports, music, and news. The barbershop had its own energy. I had to balance speed and quality. But at first, I was slow, always checking and rechecking. Zach reminded me, neatness and consistency are more important than rushing. Fast will come later, he said. That patience taught me not to compare my beginning to someone else's mastery. By the end of the day, I was exhausted. My feet ached, my back hurt, and my head was sore from the constant buzzing of clippers and from the smell of disinfectant. But the final task, again, was always cleaning the clippers, combs, scissors, the chairs, and the floors. It was tiring, but it gave me pride. It was a reminder that being a barber is not just about a haircut. It's about the whole cycle of preparation, service, and care. Through these Saturdays, I learned lessons that go beyond barbering. Cleaning taught me discipline. At first, I rushed it, but then I realized when I cleaned carefully, everything else flowed better. This discipline has carried into my daily life, whether if it's me keeping my desk clean or organized. I see how small routines build good habits, and through learning how to cut hair, it taught me patience, because a fade doesn't happen instantly. It taught me focus, because one wrong move can ruin a haircut. It taught me adaptability, because every client is different. And above all, it taught me people skills. A barber's chair is not just a seat, it's a place for trust, where clients open up, share stories, and leave feeling more confident than when they walked in. Looking back, I realized that my journey at Kicks and Whips was not just about learning how to cut hair. It was about learning who I am. I discovered that I enjoy working with my hands, that I like being creative, and that I can push through nerves and mistakes to improve. The discipline of cleaning, the challenge of mastering techniques, the responsibility of handling someone's appearance, all of this shaped me. In the future, I see myself continuing this profession. One day, I hope to open up one of my own shops, maybe one like Cakes and Whips, a place not just for grooming, but for conversation, laughter, and community. I want my barbershop to be a space where people don't just leave with a haircut, but with confidence and connection. Barbering is not only about tools, techniques, and hygiene. It's about confidence, discipline, and connection. History shows us that barbers were always trusted figures. Theory gives us the knowledge, but practice, the long Saturdays, the mistakes, the small victories, that's where a true barber is made. My journey at Kicks and Whips has given me skills that I will carry out for the rest of my life, not just in the barbershop, but in everything I do. And now finally, I would like to thank my parents for taking me to the barbershop every weekend. I'd like to thank Mr. Bester and Mr. Hibbert for always guiding me and pushing me to do my best. Another thank you goes to Zach for sharing his skills and teaching me. And most of all, I'd like to thank my friends for trusting me with their hair and giving me a chance to practice and get better. Thank you. I will now be calling up Eden.
Good evening, everyone in attendance. My name is Eden Navaya Krishna, and for my grade 11 project, I did Japanese manga. What is manga? Manga are Japanese comics and graphic novels, originating in Japan during the 12th century. It's characterized by its distinguished art and storytelling. Manga has a wide variety of age demographics as it ranges from kids to teens and adults. During 12th to 19th century Japan, early works of manga were drawn and displayed with either woodblock prints or painted hand scrolls. The arts usually depicted jovial illustrations with storytelling elements. During the Meiji period, 1868 to 1912, manga started getting some Western influences. A person who creates manga, or anyone who is in the industry, is called a mangaka. Manga comes in various ways, as in one strip, or as a whole book, to even a running series that could result in it getting animated. Manga has gained popularity all around the world, impacting pop culture and inspiring a ton of anime and other media adaptations around the globe with unique characters and riveting storytelling. There is quite a stark difference between manga and comic books. Think Marvel comic books. Comic books open like regular books, while manga opens the opposite way. The way manga is read is completely different from comic books and graphic novels. Usually comics are read from left to right, while manga is read from right to left. Another stark difference is that manga and comics, Another stark contrast between manga and comics is that manga is not colored and relies solely on white, black, and gray for coloring in and shading. Throughout my 3 to 4 years in Michael Mount, I was aware of the grade 11 projects, yet I never really knew what I was going to do. Until the last term of grade 10, where we had to start with our proposals. I originally wanted to design my own jewelry, but that idea was scrapped. Animation? Sewing? Nope. I had no idea what to do for my grade 11 project until I started thinking of my hobbies and the branches of those interests that I have not explored yet. Through that process, I came to the conclusion of drawing my own manga with the help of my friend Oratile. I have tried to draw my favorite characters in that art style, but it never came out right. So this was the perfect thing to do for my project, as it is a part of my interests, yet still new. After solving that problem comes a new one, which is, what do I make my manga about? I couldn't come up with an original plotline or a whole new world. My friend Oratile again, so I was struggling, and she mentioned my favorite show, The Office. And that's where I decided to make my manga about the main couple, Jim Halpert and Pam Beesly. It's easily recognizable and can comfortably get people into the world of manga without needing much context. I originally wanted to draw my manga on paper, the classic way. Creating manga is a very lengthy process. The first step is creating and establishing the plot of the chapter along with a summary of said chapter. The mangaka will then create a rough sketch of the storyboard. This part of the process includes creating the layout of the chapter, dividing the page, the dialogue, rough sketches of the characters, and placement of the speech bubbles. Once receiving the initial draft from the editors, the mangaka can start with new line work. This part is where the mangaka will finalize what lines will go into what speech bubble. The next part of this is creating the final draft. This process is called inking. This part entails the mangaka drawing in pen or ink. As aforementioned, I originally wanted to create my manga on paper, but when I tried, it was, to say the least, abysmal. No matter how hard I tried, the lines were off, the shading wasn't good, the structure of the characters' faces and bodies just didn't look right. The final result wasn't what I wanted at all. This is where my biggest challenge with this project came to be. Due to my undesired result, I fell into a bad art block. An art block is when an artist can't bring themselves to create. Nothing seems to come to mind when looking or creating an idea. It's like a block is quite literally in your head. Being in an art block usually includes feelings of not feeling motivated, difficulty producing works, and in my case, feeling insecure and critical of your work. This was by far the most difficult thing to overcome. I felt inadequate and my confidence just vanished. I was put in a very awkward place emotionally and mentally, as I couldn't even draw or come up with any ideas. I almost felt disconnected from drawing, so I decided to take some time off from drawing during the June holidays. When I was in my art block, I couldn't do much. Whenever I picked up a sketchbook, pen, pencil, even a coloring book, I felt blank. My mind couldn't come up with any ideas or aim as to what I was doing. I actually could not do anything regarding art or creative work, no matter how hard I tried. It's quite an isolating feeling. It also added onto my stress and anxiety regarding this project. My mind kept thinking, what if I never finish this? Or will I have the time? I even had slight regrets about picking my topic. My art block also made my imposter syndrome a little bit worse. I felt like my art was inferior to others, as even in rare occasions where I did do a drawing or color in a page in a coloring book, I didn't feel proud or happy with the end result. But there was light at the end of the tunnel, though. I was watching The Office when I had the idea of working on Procreate on an iPad, and before long, my art block was slowly fading away. Around that time, I went to a ceramics paint class, which helped. I then made the decision to draw my manga digitally and print it out. Going digital was by far the best decision I could make, as Procreate has many perks with helping me, like layers, making lines straight, different tools. Overall, it really helped me get back on track. While there is good within my story, there's also the bad, as I needed to really push in order to get my manga completed, as my break caused me to restart quite late as I was drawing and getting my hours in. But what matters is that I was back in a much better place mentally and emotionally. Through my project, I slowly learned the fundamentals of art. I used to just draw and see what would look good, but now I've actually started using methods to help with making my faces actually look right. In my practical, I had a method, which was a process of taking the storyboard I created months ago, insert it into the canvas on Procreate, and change the opacity of it. I'll then open a new layer. In that new layer, I'll sketch over it, not trace, to get the basic positions, proportions, backgrounds, and guidelines where the eyes, nose, and mouth would be. I opened another layer and added more details, facial expressions, hair, clothing, and objects. After getting everything right, another layer is opened once again, where I then outlined and basically cemented everything with black ink on Procreate. Sometimes I would have no idea how to draw Jim's facial expressions, especially his eyes. I weirdly only struggled with his eyes, and only his eyes. Everything else was fine, like his body, mouth, hair, everything else was fine. It was just his eyes that I struggled with the most. As a result of this, in most panels, he's smiling with his eyes closed, which, funnily enough, works as Jim's personality is very fun and laid back. So it works. But it also works as it gives off the impression that Jim was always smiling brightly with Pam or anything relating to her. When everything else is finished with Jim and Pam, I then started with the background. In manga, as aforementioned, no color is used. The only color used is black, white, and gray for shading in and coloring in. I use black for many things, but certain things would also be black, which result in many objects and figures blending in together. That's where white and gray comes in. White and gray can be used for highlights like this instance. White and gray is used to add some dimension to clothes and hair by showing the wrinkles and creases of the clothes, but also strands of hair. My favorite use of white by far is using it on Pam's hair, as her hair is wavy, almost curly. The white makes the hair really stand out amongst everything. Once a panel is done, the speech bubbles will be added. I draw the speech bubble in and type the actual dialogue that was written or planned beforehand. The dialogue comes directly from the show itself, The Office. I search up clips from the official The Office YouTube channel for certain scenes and write down what I would like to be in the manga. Once everything looks good in my eyes, voila, a panel is born. Overall, my experience on this project has been a roller coaster. To the picking of my project, coming up with what I wanted my manga to be about, the art block, the creation of the panels itself, it was definitely an experience. I've been through quite a bit regarding my grade 11 project. I've had my confidence be at the absolute lowest. I went many weeks with not a lot of sleep due to anxiety and stress in my project, and even grieving the loss of a family member during this process. Yet, despite everything I've been through, I've seen myself grow with my art skills. I've discovered skills within myself I never knew I had. I am extremely happy with the end result of my project, despite how tiresome and almost isolated I felt. I believe this project has been a great way to close the chapter of my Waldorf journey and open a new chapter with many experiences like this. While I end my speech, I want to give acknowledgements to the following. My friend Oretile, who helped me pick out the topic for my project and what it'll be about. My mentor, Mr. Hibbett, who helped me guide me through this lengthy and gruesome process. My parents, for understanding the difficulties of me going through my mental strain and helping me process loss. My older brother, for having curiosity what manga is. My guardian, Ms. Footer, for consistently asking for updates on where I was in terms of deadlines. Myself, for persevering through my struggles, handling grief for the first time, and producing a body of work I've always wanted to create. And lastly, my grandmother. Your presence may not be here, but your legacy will forever be known and carried. Thank you all for listening to my speech, as I really appreciate it. Thank you. And the next person is Mia.
Boxing is defined by the dictionary as the sport or practice of fighting with the fists. After the 9 months I've spent on my grade 11 project, I would have to say that boxing is so much more than that. It's a sport built on structure, discipline, preparation, and mental resilience. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mia Top, and my project is called Fight for Change. I chose to do boxing because I wanted to push myself far beyond my comfort zone and see how much I could improve myself. I had previously gone through a year of medical issues that prevented me from exercising. I was unfit and unsure of myself physically. Boxing would help me to rebuild myself, both physically and mentally. I never expected to learn so much from this experience, not just about boxing, but about myself as well. For thousands of years, boxing has been in existence. The earliest depictions of this sport come from ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, around the time of 3000 BCE. In ancient Greece, it became formalized and was incorporated into the Olympic Games. During this era, no form of gloves was used, and fights would often only end when a competitor was completely unable to continue. Over time, boxing developed into a more professional sport with specific rules and safety regulations. Fights were governed by weight classes, referees, rounds, and all sorts of protective gear. It is now a display of strategy, endurance, timing, and skill, rather than a test of brute force as it used to be. From Muhammad Ali to Katie Taylor, boxing has grown to include athletes from every background, and now people take up boxing for all sorts of reasons, including sport, fitness, self-defense, or personal growth. The theory to boxing can be grouped into 4 main aspects: physical training, diet and weight cutting, mental preparation, and safety and equipment. These aspects help to show the reality and experience of how boxers prepare. In terms of physical training, it is important that boxers train harder than what their actual fight demands. My coach, Simon Dominguez, introduced me to something known as Fight Camp, which is an intense training program. He would run 10 kilometers in the mornings of every weekday and then train for 2 full hours, skipping, shadow boxing, and sparring with fellow boxers. Then, later on in the day, he would do strength training, followed by recovery work, such as using a sauna or taking an ice bath. As important as this training is, it is equally important to rest, so Sundays are used strictly for rest. This routine would go on for multiple weeks leading up to a fight. Dieting is a crucial aspect for boxers, especially when they are required to meet a specific weight limit. Some fighters will focus their diet mostly on protein, avoiding carbs and sugar, while some other fighters follow more extreme meal plans, for example, a carnivore diet in which a person only eats meat. I also learned about a weight loss method from my coach. It is known as water loading, and it requires boxers to drink up to 10 liters of water a day, and then suddenly cut it out entirely once their fight gets close. While it is a harsh and dangerous method, it is extremely effective and is used by many professionals before weigh-ins. Boxers need to be able to stay calm under pressure, make decisions quickly, and manage fear and frustration. This is why mental strength is just as, if not more important than physical strength. There are all sorts of ways that fighters can learn to better control their mental state. Some see therapists or sports psychologists. What matters is that a boxer is in control, because mental clarity is everything. While the sport might look dangerous, safety is built into it. Professionals undergo frequent MRIs and strict health checks. They wear protective gear such as hand wraps, gloves, mouth guards, and sometimes headgear. Training equipment that is often used includes many different types of punching bags, skipping ropes, and pads. Each tool has a specific purpose and helps build strength, speed, accuracy, and control. Moving on to my personal experience of the sport. When I started boxing, I was coming out of a long recovery period with no muscle strength and very little confidence in my physical ability. I had struggled to find a sport that I enjoyed until I discovered my love for volleyball in 2024. That gave me more motivation to try something more extreme for my grade 11 project. I trained at Fight City Gym in Morning Glen. The environment was surprisingly welcoming. The gym had an interesting theme: orange and black floors and walls, upbeat music, and a mix of people, all working on improving themselves. I trained one-on-one with my coach, which helped me build confidence without comparing myself to others. My first session focused on legs and footwork. I ran up and down stairs, did different jumping exercises, and was constantly moving. The next day, I was extremely stiff, but despite the exhaustion, I felt proud of myself. As weeks went on, I trained every Friday, then more frequently during holidays, boxing every second day and training volleyball in between. I noticed real changes in my body and mind. Boxing forced me to improve my fitness, speed, muscle endurance, and balance. Holding my arms up for long periods of time was challenging. Skipping helped me to improve my footwork. Shadow boxing helped my coordination and speed, and lifting weights built strength in my shoulders, core, and arms. I also started using a supplement called Revive, an electrolyte mix my coach recommended. It helped me manage fatigue and stay focused, especially when I was juggling my academics and training. One of the most surprising parts of this process was realizing how much mental strength boxing required, as I had to push through discomfort, stay calm under pressure, and not let my emotions get in the way. I learned to focus on breathing, stay present in the moment, and keep trying even when I felt like giving up. In conclusion, when I first started boxing, I'd assumed that I was signing up to learn how to defend myself and improve my fitness. What I didn't realize was that I was stepping into one of the toughest, most empowering challenges I've experienced. Boxing taught me discipline, resilience, and respect for my body. It showed me how to keep showing up, even when I was tired, sore, or scared. I may not continue boxing into matric, but I'll carry its lessons with me forever, both in sport and in life. Before I end, I would like to give special thanks to all the people that helped me along my boxing journey. Firstly, I want to thank my coach, Simon Dominguez, for pushing me in training and teaching me how to box. Thank you to my mother, Nadine Top, for organizing training and driving me up and down every week. Thank you to my mentor, Ms. Pinheiro, for making sure I stayed on track and improving all my written work. And thank you to my tutor, Candace Somerset, for helping me efficiently manage my workload. I am extremely grateful to everyone and what they have contributed for me. Thank you. We will now have a 15-minute interval.
Kalam Naidu, and today I will be presenting to you my grade 11 project, Tea Time. The grade 11 project is about testing how you do out of your comfort zone. You could be an introvert who enjoys the luxuries of staying at home by yourself, but your project could be public speaking. This takes you out of your comfort zone completely. The grade 11 project is more than just a meaningless task to accomplish. It is a lesson to be learned. And with that, let us begin. My journey began in January under the guidance of my mentor, my dad. He introduced me to the fundamentals of golf, summarized by the acronym GASP: grip, alignment, stance, and posture. These fundamentals not only help set up the base for my swing, but also allowed me to see what areas I'm lacking in. For example, I learned I have a very, very weak core, and I have very bad balance due to my numerous ankle injuries. The beginning lessons tested me more mentally than physically, as it was evident I lacked focus. There were moments of anger, there were moments of frustration, and even doubt in my capabilities. I cried for not being able to hit the ball, and I wept for not doing my best. But with patience and persistence, I didn't only achieve hitting the ball 100 meters out, but I gained confidence in achieving the goals in my project. After failing too many times to count, I developed an understanding and mentality for the game. In this game, you have to be calm. You have to have a level of focus that cannot be broken. While playing golf, I realized I was playing in a centuries-old game. The origins of golf are both rich and varied. They are part of a rich historical tapestry. Golf, as we know it, was not made in a single moment, but evolved across centuries and cultures. From Paganica, played by the Romans with a leather ball and wooden clubs, to Chuan in China during the Ming Dynasty, and Kolf in the Netherlands. Each iteration refined the essence of the game we know today. It even faced royal displeasure in the 15th century by King James II. This is because soldiers weren't practicing archery. However, it endured, and by 1502, the ban was lifted. Mary, Queen of Scots, became the first documented player. The tradition continued to grow and became formalized through the first 13 rules of golf established in 1744 by the Honourable Company of Edinburgh Golfers, rules which still resonate in the principles of golfing today. The historical context gives depth to the tools we now employ. The modern golf bag contains an array of clubs, each engineered for specific use. The driver, with its low loft, designed for maximum distance. Fairway woods offer a balance of control and power, while hybrids provide versatility and forgiveness, very useful for beginners. Irons offer precision, wedges finesse, and putters end the journey. Understanding these fundamentals are essential, but mastery requires more than knowledge. It demands feeling, intuition, and practice. I learned this through hours on the range, adjusting my grip, correcting my stance, and striving for consistency. Just as the equipment had evolved from wooden clubs and leather balls to advanced materials like titanium and carbon fiber, so too must the player. However, knowledge and equipment are only a part of the story. Golf is played on a stage designed to test every aspect of a player's ability. A typical course is a carefully constructed landscape consisting of a teeing ground, the fairway, the green, the rough, the various hazards such as bunkers and water features. Each hole represents a unique challenge, demanding strategic thinking and adaptability. I experienced these hazards firsthand when I went to the course with Liam, Jasper, and Federico. My ball landed 6 consecutive times in the water feature. The objective is clear, however. Complete each hole in as few strokes as possible. Terms like par, birdie, and bogey became markers of performance, measuring success and setbacks. But beyond the scorecard, golf teaches resilience. It is a game of mental fortitude where one must recover from mistakes, regain composure, and persist despite obstacles, even when your ball lands in the water feature 6 times. When I played my first game with Liam, Jasper, and Kiko, I realized I was so nervous. I felt embarrassed coming to the game with little experience, but I persisted. Many of my shots, if not all my shots, landed in random places. Slowly, I felt doubt creep in. What if all the tears that I had shed, all the blood vessels that were about to erupt, were in vain? In my moments of weakness, Kiko helped me through it. He assured me that everything will be fine and that I should carry on. So, I regained my composure and carried on through the course. Throughout the day, I was disappointed in how I played. I made our team slow, resulting in other players surpassing us. The blistering sun had painted my skin a shade darker and my eyes a deep red. Then, when everything was lost, I swept the ball up and over. I was ecstatic. This single shot had made me understand what the essence of golf is. It is a glimpse of excellence amidst the struggle, compelling us to continue. Golf is more than a pastime. It is a discipline, and it intertwines physical skill with mental fortitude. It encourages integrity, as players often call penalties on themselves. It fosters camaraderie, as rounds are shared with friends and mentors. And it forges character through patience and humility. As I continue my journey, I'm mindful of those who came before me. Legends like Tiger Woods, Ben Hogan, and Suasanka Papua Suagaram, who shaped and contributed to the legacy of golf. Golf is a mirror reflecting our strengths and vulnerabilities. It challenges us to be better on and off the court. It allows us to become better versions of ourselves. I would like to thank my external mentor, my dad, for helping me through every aspect of this project. My mom, my second dad, and Amber for supporting me through these 9 months. And to my friends, Liam, Jasper, and Kiko for inviting me to an unforgettable game of golf. And thank you to my internal mentor, Mrs. Pinheiro, for helping me with my project. I wouldn't be here without you today. Thank you. Next up, we have Michael Kekana.
What if I told you that exploring the underwater world did not start with high-tech gear, but with a hollow reed, or now known as a snorkel? That the fast glide of an Olympic swimmer takes thousands of years of learning and improving. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Rao Kekana. I have always been fascinated by the water, but if I'm being honest, I was also a little afraid of it. I wanted to change that. I wanted to conquer that fear. To learn a life skill that I believe everyone should know, and to see for myself what it's like underwater. That's why I picked this topic. It was a personal challenge, but it quickly became a deep dive into history, science, and I soon found out a lot of cold water. Swimming is one of the oldest human activities. We know people swam in ancient Egypt over 4,000 years ago. It was also important in Greece and Rome for military training. While it fell out of favor in Europe for the time, it became an Olympic sport in 1896. The desire to explore underwater is just as old. Ancient divers collected treasure from the seafloor. For centuries, inventors sketched ideas for breathing underwater. But the big change happened in 1943 when Jacques Costier and Emily Gagnan created the Aqualungs. This was the first working scuba system. It let regular people explore the ocean, turning diving from a job into a hobby for everyone. My own efforts to learn swimming took 6 weeks and 12 lessons. I began with floating kickboard, trying to copy the arm and leg movement of freestyle and backstroke. Little by little, I used a smaller board until I could swim without any help. That part came faster than I thought. Then came the hard part, breaststroke and butterfly. Getting the rhythm right was tricky. It did not help that I was dealing with some body pain at that time. It really showed me that what looks graceful and easy on TV takes a huge amount of practice and effort. But my project was also about going deeper, literally. I wanted to try scuba diving. But scuba is not just putting on a tank and jumping in. The gear is like a life support system. A strong tank holds your air. A regulator makes sure you can breathe the air. A buoyancy control device, or BCD, is like an up and down elevator underwater. You also need a wetsuit to stay warm, a mask to see, fins to move, and a diving computer to carefully watch your depth and time so you don't get sick from coming up too quickly. It is all very complex. This is where my own experience got interesting. Before my real diving lessons, I did a test session. We practiced the basics: how to clean water out of your mask, how to find your breathing piece if it dropped, and the most important rule, never hold your breath. Why? Because as you swim up, the air in your lungs gets bigger. You must also, and if you hold it in, it can hurt really badly. You must also keep popping your ears to handle the water pressure. And that is where I failed. My ears would not pop. No matter what I did, the pain was too strong. I had to get out. It turned out I had an allergy that made my ears blocked. I needed medicine before I could go back in. It was really annoying, but it taught me the most important lesson. Safety in scuba cannot be rushed. You must listen to your body. So, while I waited to get better, I went back to the pool to work on the most important skill: being calm and comfortable underwater. My new challenge was to swim to the bottom of the pool and pick up an object. At first, it was right below me. Then they moved it further away. I had to swim almost half the length of the pool underwater to pick up the object. The first time I opened my eyes underwater, I was scared. I thought it would hurt, but it was just blurry and strange. This practice made my lungs stronger and took away my fear. We also worked on diving into the water. You put your hands together, lift them above your head, and jump. I was shocked that I learned this in only 3 tries. Then we combined everything. I would dive in, start swimming freestyle, then switch to my back for backstroke. Then we even started racing. Racing my teacher was scary, but I did not lose as bad as I thought, so that gave me a little more confidence. This whole project taught me that the story of swimming and diving is about human curiosity and never stopping to try to learn. The science mixes physics, how our bodies work, and the strict safety rules. But the real experience, it was a personal journey that is both challenging and exciting. It is about not giving up when it hurts, facing your fears, and feeling the quiet, weightless freedom of the underwater world. It is a world we must protect. Swimmers and divers are only visitors. We must control our buoyancy to avoid hurting coral or the bottom. We should never touch or feed ocean animals. We should follow the leave no trace rule. Take only pictures, leave only bubbles. From ancient divers to today's explorers, our desire to see the deep ocean goes on. It is a hobby that gives you not just adventure, but a powerful link to our great lost wild place. and it all begins with being brave enough to take the first plunge. I am deeply thankful to the people who made this journey possible. My sincerest thanks to my mentor, Mr. Bennett, for his great advice and constant support throughout the process. I also want to give heartfelt thanks to Simon Madkolf and Yvonne for their amazing teachings. They taught me everything I know. Finally, I thank my mother and brother for their never-ending help, driving me to every single lesson without failure. Thank you. Next, I was pleased to call Jasper.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jasper Murray, and tonight I'd like to speak to you about my journey into the ancient art of blacksmithing and the making of my sword. My mother always said I was born with a sword in my hand, and this was seen because from a very young age I'd run through the garden with a stick, pretending I was on epic battles and heroic quests. My fascination with the subject only deepened as I grew up, deeply impacted by the stories that I read. Stories such as the Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Hobbit, Percy Jackson, all featuring heroes whose swords were extensions of themselves, tools of justice, rather than mere weapons. So when it finally came time to select a subject for my school project, no matter all my other interests and concepts, I naturally gravitated back towards the sword. Through deep historical research, I discovered that the sword has been humanity's most renowned weapon for over 4,000 years. What began with simple copper and bronze blades at origin evolved into sophisticated steel weapons that symbolized not just military might, but also authority, honor, and cultural identity. As I researched, I found how various civilizations fashioned different swords, depending on their fighting style and culture. For instance, the Romans favored a short, straight gladius for efficient stabbing within tight formations, while the Japanese katana, on the other hand, with its distinct curved and cutting edge, became inseparable from samurai identity and honor codes. But it was the Mongolian sword that ultimately captured my imagination. After watching Marco Polo, a semi-historical accurate show, these curved sabers were masterfully designed for mounted combat, allowing warriors to deliver devastating slashing attacks while galloping across the steppes on their horses. The Mongolians understood that form must follow function. Thus, every aspect of their sword, from the single-edged blade to the balanced weight distribution, was optimized for horseback warfare. Another section of my project had us looking into the theoretical components. Mine, of course, was the making of the sword. As I looked into this ancient craft, I learned that although our understanding of the science has deepened considerably since its first creation, our knowledge of the weaponry making throughout the years has not really changed much. The heating of the metals until malleable, then shaping them through hammer blows that has been around for thousands of years, are still part of the same process to this day. The blacksmith craft is a remarkable blend of science and intuition. I discovered that color serves as a crucial temperature indicator, with iron transitioning from a dull red to a bright orange yellow as it reaches optimal forging temperatures. I also learned that carbon content determines a blade's properties, with too little creating a soft blade that won't hold an edge, and too much producing a brittle weapon that might shatter in combat. After completing my research, I moved on to my practical aspect. My first step was to find a mentor, a teacher to guide me in the craft and assist me to create my sword with the necessary resources. Through an investigation into various avenues, I finally found Hilton Rutherford, a skilled and passionate blacksmith from Fourways in Johannesburg, who specialized in the art of sword, axe, and knife making. On my first weekend with Hilton, we looked into the theory of blacksmithing and how to begin creating a blade. To ease me into the process, Hilton recommended that I started with a small knife, which I made out of 1070 carbon steel, containing 0.7% carbon. This metal was from an old Jeep. My knife started with a piece of metal about this size. I then heated it up until red hot and began the forging process. Unlike popular beliefs, I did not hammer out the side to create the point, but rather the opposite end. As I hammered, it would bend into the point, as I would place it flat on the anvil. Once this process was complete, I began with the creating of the bevel, which is the sharp, shiny edge of the blade, as you can see here, that goes into the sharp edge. To create the bevel, I hammer at a sideways angle, creating this fine, smooth edge. It was quite easy with the knife, as it was a small piece of metal. As I hammered, I made a small mistake and misjudged the distance and accidentally hit my thumb, creating a blood blister, which was extremely painful. Once this process was complete, I began with the normalizing process. The normalizing process is when you heat the metal until red hot and a magnet cannot stick to the metal anymore. This is the process of spreading out the carbon so that the blade is hard and will not shatter in use. Once this process is complete, I began with the grinding stage. The grinding was extremely stressful, as one mistake could put me back 2 whole days. I started off by drawing the shape on my piece of metal and grinding out the shape I wanted for my blade. I then grinded out the bevel, which I placed on the edge and moved slowly from right to left, making sure everything was nice and smooth. Once this process was complete, I reheated the metal because I decided to create a texturing with a texture hammer. Once this process was complete, I renormalized the blade and went home, leaving the blade overnight with Hilton so he could temper the blade. Tempering is the process of heating up the blade and then leaving it out to cool, and repeating this process throughout the night. This makes the blade hard and not bendy. Once this process was complete, I decided to choose my handle, which I chose olive wood. I decided to do a seam tang, which is where you can see the metal between the 2 pieces of wood. I cut the wood in half and grinded it to the shape that I wanted. I then drilled the hole through the wood and the metal and put copper tubes in and riveted them. Riveting is the process where you hammer it so that the metal bends over the wood, keeping it strong. Once this process was complete, I hand sanded the blade, making sure everything was nice and smooth, and then polished it and sanded the wood. Once this process was complete, I began with the creation of my sheath. I used leather for my sheath, which I cut out a piece and bent it in half and sewed it all together. I then had a finished knife. I then went home and came back later that winter to start moving on to the big leagues. It was time to begin with my sword. I had earlier that week designed my blade to the right size and width. It was a similar process to the knife, but I did not use a texturing hammer. It also took a lot longer, as the blade is a lot longer. I started with the point again and then did the bevel. The bevel was harder to do and harder to make straight, as with the longer blade, it was a bit harder to see the bevel. Once this process was complete, I hammered out the thin edge of the handle, which I decided to do a hidden tang. A hidden tang is where you can't see the metal of the blade and the wood is stuck over. This process took me quite a while as well, and it was quite nice in winter by the forge, and it was very warm. Once this process was complete, I decided to begin with my handle. The handle, I chose a piece of wood. I was originally going to do wood for my handle, but then decided to wrap the wood in ostrich leather. which gave it a nice texture and firm grip. I chose brass for my handle and my pommel, and decided to make a small brass piece to put over the blade to make it look even more beautiful. I then grinded into the shape of my handguard and my pommel, and then polished it. Once this process was complete, I normalized the blade and went home. I then left it overnight for Hilton to temper again. Once I came back, I began with the hand sanding process, which took me about 7 hours. Once this process was complete, I began with the assembly of my entire blade. I started off by placing the thin brass piece over my blade, and then the handguard, and then the wood, and then the pommel. I then riveted the top to make sure everything stayed in place. Once this process was done, I created my sheath, which I cut 2 pieces of leather out with a U-shaped leather to stick in between, and then stitched everything together, and then decided to do these small little finishes so I could put it on my belt for my speech. My sword isn't perfect. An expert would immediately spot the flaws, but it's mine. I researched it, I designed it, I forged it, and I solved countless problems along the way. There's something magical about transforming a plain piece of metal through fire and force into something beautiful and functional. This you can also see in life, because as you go through life, you improve yourself and you try to be the best you can be. This process taught me a lot about myself. I learned that mistakes are learning opportunities, each correction ultimately improving the final product. Most importantly, I experienced a profound satisfaction of creating something meaningful with my own hands. I also discovered something I'm definitely not known for before: patience. I want to sincerely thank Hilton Rutherford for his guidance with the creation of both my blades, my internal mentors, Mrs. Besson and Mr. Hibbert, for trying their best to keep me up to date, as I'm not the best with due dates. And I'd also like to thank my mom and dad for all the support throughout this journey. Thank you for listening. I will now show you that my blade does follow its function. Thank you. I would now like to introduce our last speaker of the night, Ela.
For me, a story is a looking glass facing the world of another person's mind. A novel allows for the brief entry into that world, to experience something entirely other. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ela Solomon, and today I'm going to take you along with me as I dive into the world of literature from an unusual perspective, creating it. For my grade 11 project, I decided to take on the challenge of writing my own novella, with the goal of becoming a true published author. As Stephen Hawking once noted, the scariest moment is always just before you start. My relationship with words has always been reading, so much so that it has become some sort of a coping mechanism for me in times of stress and confusion. This project was a way for me to discover the deeper side of literature and to attempt to create my own story. It was also a way for me to disassociate the daunting task of writing with the school and work environment and discover if I am just as passionate about writing as I am about reading. To begin to understand modern literature in depth, one has to look backwards towards the history of writing itself. The oldest form of writing with evidence known to mankind is the Sumerian cuneiform, dated back to around 3200 BCE, which was used in Mesopotamia, known today as Iraq. It was with the cuneiform that the world's first author by name, Enheduanna, wrote. Another ancient form of writing is the art of Egyptian hieroglyphics. The word hieroglyph means sacred carving and is the Greek translation of the Egyptian phrase, God's words. From a mix of these many languages came the creation of the English language. The language was predominantly derived from the Roman alphabet and was brought to England by the Christian missionaries in the early 600s. From there, the English adopted the language and it spread and evolved all over the world with colonization. Moving on to the more interesting part of history, ancient storytelling. There is a somewhat opaque storyline that can be followed when tracing the history of storytelling, and it begins, of course, with art. The oldest form of rock art, known to mankind, was found in the Blombos Cave in southern Africa and dates back to around 73,000 years. After art comes the form of oral storytelling. As suggested, this form cannot be traced accurately, but there is evidence of it all over the world. For instance, there is a story told by a tribe in South Australia about a volcano believed to be the god Budj Bim. The story goes that when it erupted, it created the lava created the wetlands along the coast that the tribe had used for thousands of years. It was geographically discovered later that it was in fact the volcano that created those wetlands. However, the eruption had been 37,000 years ago and never again, meaning that the story had passed down through all that time. After oral traditions came the written representation of stories all over the world. As language and alphabets evolved and became more popular, acting and plays played a large role in the spreading of storytelling, and so too did the eventual inventions of the printing press, typewriter, and much later, the digitalization era of film, television, and the internet. The theory of writing a fictional novel is an infinite well of information. A novel is an intricate form of expression and insight into the world that another person experiences. Processes like editing and time management are key habits to maintain in order to prioritize the success of a novel. When writing a novel, there are a few key points that one must keep in mind. The first is story creation. The traditional structure of a story lies in the original plotline structure, with a beginning, middle, and end, but there are an infinite number of ways that a story can actually be structured. One of the key elements is creating conflict. A successful story is made so by the relevant struggles and obstacles that the characters have to overcome and face. Another key point is plotline development, which can be broken down into 5 stages. The exposition is the introduction to the characters and setting of the story, as well as a peek into the main conflict. The rising action is the part of the novel where tension is built as the characters delve deeper into the main conflict of the story. The climax is often the most exciting part of the novel and is the part where the characters come into direct contact with the conflict. The falling action is the part of the novel that quells the tension, builds from the climax, and turns the event of the story towards the resolution. Finally, the resolution, which is the conclusion of the story, where all loose ends are tied up and explained, and the main conflict is overcome and resolved. The third key point to writing a novel is character development. The development of a genuine, believable character is crucial to a novel. If a character is not genuine, it is a distraction to the reader rather than a believable part of the story. For instance, in Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling, the books, not the movies, Harry, as the protagonist, was written in such a way that he was flawed, that he made mistakes and he messed up, but was still able to bring the culmination of the story to a satisfying end. The antagonist of the series, Lord Voldemort, is driven by the ambition and power in a way that seems far-fetched. However, when one looks deeper into his story, they begin to make out the patterns of real-life flaws, and that he represents layers of humanity, like humility and love, that can be stripped away, leaving only the helpless desire for power. Dynamic characters are present to show realism within the story, to emphasize that even side characters are subject to change and growth. For instance, Neville Longbottom from Harry Potter is an easily bullied and awkward side character in the beginning, but he grows considerably throughout the story in both courage and self-confidence. Static characters are the opposite of dynamic characters. They never change. Their presence within a novel is usually to present one resounding idea or message towards the main characters. To sum up, the theory of writing a fictional novel spans over an infinite number of subjects and themes. Each aspect of writing is unique. From creating character traits and compiling plotline structures to conveying the message and fundamental purpose of the story to the reader. The final step of this project was, of course, my physical engagement, the culmination of my own novella. In theory, the process of writing a novel is fairly simple. Think of a plot, add a couple of characters, plot twist, and there you have it. However, the part that is rarely ever spoken about is that the human mind takes ages to settle on one decision. Writing a scene that seems incredible to the writer one day could seem just as terrible just the next. In my case, I spent about 4 months brainstorming ideas and genres and plot lines for my writing, but was too afraid to actually start. Along with procrastination, I think what I experienced was close to writer's block, on top of a fear of actually starting the process and hating everything that I wrote. There was a definite block in my mind every time I thought about creating that new document. When I did, I spent about another month trying to put all my carefully planned details down into the document and ended up hating everything that I wrote, just as I'd feared. In the end, I made the decision to restart the entire project, completely from scratch and with no plan as to what the outcome would look like. A particular thought process came to mind towards the end of the draft. As I slowly began to accept the underlying fear that came with the process, I realized that the other reason that I didn't want to write was the misconception that I didn't like to write. After years of associating the art of writing with a school, judgmental environment, it was difficult for me to understand that this was a choice that I was making. A piece of writing that, for arguably the first time ever, was completely my own, with no outside influence but my own thoughts and perceptions of what a piece of writing should actually look like. On the topic of association, this project awakened a question within me, a question about associating a piece of writing with its author. When an author's views of the world and what they stand for differ to yours, can you really see their writings and their perceptions of the world in the same way? The short answer is no. It was in this realization, over time and through this project, that Harry Potter lost some of its grandeur within my mind. Somewhere along the process, my mindset changed, from me controlling every detail and aspect of the story, to letting my mind wander to every crazy, wonderful idea that it could. I started to realize that letting go of control wasn't as terrible as it first seemed, and I ended up with a product that was more than I possibly thought I could have created. It was a refreshing feeling to know that I'd grown, that I'd changed, and overcome a fear that I never thought I had. It was also made me realize that there may be a whole host of other beautiful things that I could love that are waiting for me to get up off the ground and take a chance on them. Both satisfying and exhilarating, it was an experience I am truly grateful to have taken a chance on. For a peek into the story, it follows 5 friends who decide to visit a deserted island, searching for the closure of a mystery buried in time and history. But their light-hearted adventure spirals into something far more sinister. As time moves on, they begin to discover that the girl who went missing 100 years ago did not disappear by natural means. I want to say an enormous thank you to everyone who helped me during this process. To my mentor, Ms. Pinheiro, I say thank you for always being there if I had questions, and for always trusting me, even though it got stressful at times. Thank you to my guardian, Mrs. Footer, for keeping me on track and never letting me lose sight of my goal. I would also like to thank my parents for editing the process and making sure that the process went as smoothly as possible. Lastly, I would like to thank my friends, family, and teachers, basically my entire community, for being my inspiration throughout this process. I could not have completed the work without the interactions that we had every single day that inspired me. Thank you all for listening, and even more for reading.
Thank you so much for joining us. That concludes our evening. Let's give our Class 11s one more round of applause.